Welcome back to another edition of Inside Great Lakes Sailing. My name is Greg Norman, your host. We were at Thanksgiving in 2022, and as we end our third season here at the show, we are bringing you the 90th edition of Inside Great Lakes Sailing, and we want to do something a little bit different. We wanted to hit some of the highlights from the interviews that we had a chance to conduct this past year, and I think some of them were extraordinary, but we're going to bring you some highlights from Paul Kayard, to Terry Hutchinson, to Doug DeVos, some local champions, and Paul Nectarline, and just give you what I thought were extraordinary moments in a long-form interview format. We're going to go away for a couple of months because we're going to kind of revamp and rethink the show. We're going to hopefully figure out what we want to be able to do and how we're going to bring the format to you. We want to cover more events. Part of this has been a labor of love, so we're not charging advertising, and it's just something we get on and have this opportunity. I think part of that discussion is being able to talk to some of the folks we've talked to and get to the levels we've had, because it's basically me and a computer. So we've had a chance to talk to a number of America's Cup veterans and captains and overseas and Sail GP and all kinds of ties at the top end of the sport. And we've hopefully talked to a number of those having the levels and enjoying it locally. What I want to do is either possibly go to PBS. We may come back to YouTube. We're going to kind of figure that out. But we're definitely going to bring the show back for a fourth season starting in February of 2023. That said, we want to bring you the highlights of 2022, and we think you'll enjoy those. Before that, we had a chance to do something extraordinary. A chance this past week to snow ski and sail in the same week. We had to get through the ice up on the Clinton River, but we were fortunate enough to go out for, a couple hours over the Thanksgiving weekend. And we're going to bring you some of that before we get into the interview. So we hope you'll enjoy the last show and pay close attention to the last couple interviews with Terry Hutchinson. I think you'll find that the most extraordinary. Stay tuned, and we'll be back in a second. The first thing you got to know about this escapade is that we're at North Star here on Thanksgiving morning. And the first thing you know is the river is frozen. So we'll see how much sailing we're going to do. But that's the nature of the beast. We're spending Thursday, which is obviously Thanksgiving, here on 320 Hunter out in the middle of Lake St. Clair. Our boat's put away, but we're talking with Dennis Schmalzl, who owns the boat, was nice enough to invite us out. Dennis, I only got one question. Why?
It's a tradition, apparently. I've been told by some people that are lifelong sailors that sailing on Thanksgiving was a tradition, and I'm like, well, that sounds like a great idea. And I don't want to put my boat away, so I decided to do the same.
You're a self-proclaimed cruising sailor rather than being a sort of a zealot racer. Do cruisers have apparently the same disease that racers have? They got to always be on the water?
Yeah, but you don't see many race boats out here. I think they're all they're afraid of the cold.
I find it interesting, as we'll show some film a little bit later of some boat that went by. You really prove the adage that if there are two boats on the water, they're both racing, even if they don't know it.
Yeah, for sure.
All right, well, how long do you plan to be in the water before the season's out?
I usually sail until the lake gets hard.
Okay.
So last year we actually sailed on Christmas Day.
And if you'll notice, when you run over the top of this, you'll see some ice that was on the river as we pulled into the parking lot.
Oh, yeah.
So it was crusted over, except if you're coming down the Clinton River, just west of North Star, it kind of stopped the east side out. But even coming out the canal, it was a little bit deep from that standpoint. So
yeah, there was a couple of ice flows out there.
Okay.
We had to dodge.
Well, we appreciate being out here, and a big power boat, a fishing boat just went by.
Yeah.
We'll give a little look over there to that whole thing.
So I actually put these windows on the side of the cockpit here to help with the cold weather sailing and rough weather sailing. I like to sail no matter what the weather is.
It looks great. This is good, solid enclosure. A little hot though in the summertime, I would think.
Well, that's why you can roll those sides up and you don't have to worry about it so much.
Well, we do appreciate you letting us come out and have some fun on Thanksgiving Day.
Sure.
Welcome back. We hope you enjoyed a little bit of that time here on the water and the ice over the Clinton River. And as the boat guys take their boats out of the water, it'll be an interesting sight. We want to bring you some insight and some vignettes of various interviews we've done over the past summer, last 6 months. And we're going to start off with what I think is really an extraordinary conversation with Doug DeVos, who was of Amway fame and certainly one of the best sailors and sailing syndicate, Quantum Sails in the United States. And he's going to talk a little bit about the business end of sailing. I think you'll find it really refreshing.
And doing some real hard work on looking at demographics for the show and figuring out what we want to do with it, we've come to the conclusion that sailing doesn't get the publicity that it needs, but part of that's the numbers that it is. And sometimes we think, and this is just my personal premise, I'm going to ask the question, sometimes we think we're bigger than we are. And I say that there's about 2.5 million sailboats in America. Yeah. That being the case, if you judge it against the other recreational pursuits of equal value, those numbers are 60 to 70 million. So my question is this: do we have a real serious understanding of what we do as a sport? And could we be better at our publicity to bring more people? And I say that because everything U.S. Sailing is telling us is that we're shrinking as a sport in terms of numbers.
Well, we have to get better. We have to tell our story. We have to talk about the elements of sailing that are important to somebody who hasn't sailed before, but who would be interested in it. And that's why sometimes when we talked earlier about, you got big boats, small boats, this and that, it's easy for us to disconnect and only talk about our little part of the sport rather than the bigger ideas, this idea of being in nature and out on the water and with family or friends and challenging yourself to do things that are kind of hard sometimes, finding it out. It's a hard sport to do. So we got to find the communications about it so you can share it with people in a way that's compelling and attractive. I think what you're doing, Greg, to get the word out, to talk about this, helps our sailing community tell their story as well, and be strong enough to tell their story, to talk to a friend and express why they're so passionate. Because every club I've ever gone to and every person I've ever talked to as a sailor, they can't stop talking about the sport because they love it. They're engaged with it, just like you would for a cyclist or a mountain climber or a skier. That's great, but we can be in that sort of category too.
One of the threads in this show is that not everybody comes to sailing with the same background or certainly the same pedigree. We've got national championships sailors on this show, from Terry Hutchinson all the way down to Paul Nectarline, who's going to talk here briefly about what it's like to win a Cal 25 national championship at the age of, the advancing age is in his 60s. Paul is an unbelievably good guy, and I think when he had a chance to win that championship with his son, he'll tell you a little bit about it. So we thought that was a really good part of that interview. We'll be back here with Paul in just a second.
I'm going to wake up tomorrow morning and I'm not going to believe it. I'll have a smile on my face because I didn't think it would ever be possible, and all of a sudden it happened. And we just had a beautiful regatta. Years ago, a couple of my best friends said, we should find some way of racing together someday. And I was able to do it. I brought a couple of good friends on. And when good friends have talent, it really comes together nice. So we've been racing together a couple of years. But I bought my boat way back in 1978. And it's been a family boat for fishing and just general sailing. 2005, I started racing it because I was racing other Cal 25s and realizing putting another Cal 25 on the line and showing people that you can just bring any boat out here and have a good time racing. That was my only intent, even if I was last. But over the years, we've been able to make the boat go faster and faster. And when the boat goes fast and is able to get up front in a regatta, it's incredible.
If Paul Nectarline has taken a different venue to the level of sport to be a national champion at the local level, Ed Reynolds, who was the Quantum Sailing president, Ed and I shared a high school and actually dated the same girl a long time ago. Not that it has any effect on this show. But Ed didn't understand about sailing until he was 21 when he got a job in the loft. And all these years later, he is the president of the second largest sailing company in the world. And Ed's story is interesting. And again, like Paul, not everybody comes with a silver spoon. Ed will talk about that right now. I want to take you back to 2007. You're about 12 months on the job with Quantum, and you have to make a splash into the world of sailing, where for the most part, it was dominated by North. You made the calculated idea and effort that you were going to get involved in the Med Series. And you did, and you had to drop a serious amount of dollars to get into that series. And it was about marketing. Is that a fair characterization at the time?
What was the last thing you said above marketing?
I said you had to make a splash from a marketing standpoint, and that's what I want to talk a little bit about the cue that's on my hat. And I say that because there's some legendary stories about you having a discussion with a graphic artist from Italy, if I'm not mistaken.
Actually, from Netherlands.
Okay.
So
you make the decision that you're going to build your own boat, 2007, and that's got to be a conversation. Is that kind of the linchpin where it all started?
Yeah, I tell you, North was so strong and powerful, and they're a great company, big, strong company. And at the time, I mean, we wanted to get into the Med Cup. We wanted to get into, especially the EU, because the performance sailing is so important over there. And in all honesty, we couldn't give away a set of sails. I mean, we tried everything. And then, Doug DeVos, who's been involved with the company forever, it's like, well, why don't we do it ourselves? And that's kind of was the impetus of how we ended up with Quantum Racing.
That's a $4 or $5 million proposition when you're making those choices, because you got to build the boat, you've got to make the sails. Is that fair?
Yeah, it's not for the weak of heart. It's a strong financial commitment to be involved at this level for as long as we have.
Are you an eternal optimist? And I say that because you mentioned that you were turned down a bunch, by a bunch of sailors and by a bunch of syndicates, and so you got to be the eternal optimist to figure out that I'm going to go build my own boat and race.
Well, we had wanted, with people we worked with, people within the company, we'd had success everywhere we went. And, I thought we had a really solid process. We had really good people. So, it didn't seem like a speculation. It seemed definitely that it was an investment, and I think it has been.
Okay, now you go to the Netherlands to find your graphic artist. Just tell us a little bit of the story. I don't think you were the happiest guy when you saw the original logo. Is that fair?
I was worried that it was too much over the top. It's like, oh my gosh, we want to be a little subtle. I get teased all the time because my fashion sense is if I can go somewhere, spend the evening and leave and no one remembers I was there, then that's perfect. And, this was a little bit over the top on it, and I called up, his name's Boss, and said, geesh, I kind of like it, but boy, it's so really kind of in your face. He goes, yeah, that's how we just decided. He goes, this will be the most photographed boat in the world. And so he went on and on. He was just so abrupt. And, I said, well, okay, because he was quite expensive. I go, is there any way we can get a better deal on the price? No. He goes, because I am the best. And if you don't do this, you're stupid. It's like, wow, okay. And unfortunately, he was completely right. I mean, it was amazing, the impact of I think we were one of the first companies or boats, programs, whatever you want to put it under, that came out and it was in your face.
If I told you there were 4 young men that have sailed in the America's Cup from Harbor Springs, Michigan, you would tell me that I was probably crazy. Certainly a good bar bet. Matt Cassidy was one of those guys, and he's currently part of that program. They're down in Pensacola training at the moment. In 2021, Matt was part of the AC Championship, AC 36, and they had a pretty serious accident. And Matt talked a little bit about that, being from Harbor, and just about the safety of making sure that you pay attention when you're sailing.
Were you a part of the big crash?
No, I was on the chase boat. We were Alex Sinclair and I were on the chase boat as the rotation sailors, and we saw him capsize, and on the way up to the boat, we saw a piece of we thought was a fairing floating in the water. And so I went to pick it up, and as I reached in to pull it out, I turned it over, and it was blue. And the only blue on the boat was the hull. And we had one of the designers on the boat who started freaking out, saying, so we got on the radio because they didn't know they had a hole, because the hole's on the leeward side of the boat. And so we started radioing that the boat was sinking and you guys got major issues. And obviously we quickly realized the extent when we tried to write it, and when it came up, it was below water, or at water level.
The New Zealand fire departments and all of the folks that worked through that have to be given great credit, because it really was going to be a loss. I mean, a major loss.
Yeah, it would have been, if it wasn't for those guys, if it wasn't for Team New Zealand was watching on the TV, and they immediately grabbed all their rescue equipment, their divers, and the most experienced guys for that situation, and came out. So we had our chase boat already tied up on one side, and they came over and tied up on the other. And then the fire department, the police department, I don't know how many crash pumps it would have been in the press before when it happened, but we had 15, 20 different crash pumps from all the teams. Everyone helped out, and it was kind of a whole industry situation. It wasn't just an American Magic situation. Everyone was involved, and it was kind of cool to see. We were just racing against Prada, and we had guys from Prada on our boat helping us save it. An hour later. So it's cool that the community, we're competitors, but we're also friends at the end of the day, and everyone chipped in to help us save that thing and make it to the race course another day.
So that viewers are watching, we should point out that there was a flip of the America's Cup boat in New Zealand during an America Cup race. Am I correct?
Yep.
There's a great video online if you want to go see it, to the point of and one of the things we should point out is that you were using sails. You weren't using wings like they're using now.
Yep.
And how long did it take? It didn't take very long. Did it take 24 to 48 hours to put the boat back together?
It was, a little bit longer than that. There was quite a bit of work to do. We had to, strip the boat out. The boats are extremely complicated with all the electronics and hydraulics and everything on the boat. So what took the longest was getting that section of hull built. Again, so our boat builders cut out we got it in the shed that night. And then, over the course of, say 4 days, 5 days, the hull was fixed. Team New Zealand was actually building that piece at their boat building facility. So it just kind of shows the camaraderie amongst the teams, as our main competition was helping us build the piece that, got us back sailing. And then we got that together, and then we had to put all the electronics and everything back on the boat. So it was a monumental feat for the 7 days we had to get it from crash to back to sailing.
One of the aspects of the show this year is we try to talk a little bit about history. If you're not familiar with Sandy Douglas, think Thistle Sailboats. Sandy Douglas was just inducted into the Sailing Hall of Fame in 2020, and he was a really interesting guy. We got Gary Jobson, renowned fame, to talk a little bit about history and design and what Sandy Douglas meant to the sport of sailing, and who better to talk about him than one of the great writers and great spokesmen for the sport of sailing. In 2020, you were lucky enough to, or granted the opportunity to talk a little bit about Gordon Sandy Douglas. Sandy Douglas designed the Thistle. And I just thought we'd kind of talk to you a little bit about it, because like I said, you were the one that wrote all the information for his induction. And maybe talk briefly about his start. And I think the easiest thing to start with is that he was really mentored and sort of influenced by a guy by the name of Eufa Fox. And my follow-up is, you got to tell me what a sailing canoe is, for those of us who don't have a clue.
All right. Well, Sandy Douglas, as you say, Gordon Sandy K. Douglas, lived a long life from 1904 to 1992. So he was 88 years old. And Eufa Fox was a great British sailor, designer, wrote about it. I have a collection, hardbound copy, 6 volumes of all of Eufa Fox's works. And he was an extraordinary guy. And I think Sandy Douglas was quite influenced by Eufa Fox. And Eufa Fox later in his life taught Prince Charles how to sail. and was very close with the Duke of Edinburgh, the Queen's husband, and I think he got a lot of influence from that. And he went on to Dartmouth College, graduated in 1926, and so he was an Ivy Leaguer and had spent some time in England. And then he got intrigued by designing boats. And there's three of note, all with Scottish names. And the Thistle, as you point out, great three-person boat. He had the Highlander and he had the Flying Scot. And the beauty of the Thistle is it certainly has stood the test of time. Now, he also did the sailing canoe, which I think was an attempt to take a canoe and put a sail on it. And of course, it had no stability and you'd get wet fast and something like that. But Uffa Fox was playing with that. And really what he was trying to do is get people out on the water. So, you don't have to paddle that thing. You could put a sail on it. And then, of course, it evolved from there and had all kinds of contraptions with hiking boards over the side. And anyway, that was something in the Depression era that they tried to do. But it really was the Thistle class that stood Sandy Douglas apart, and probably the main reason that the Hall of Fame selection committee inducted him into the Hall of Fame, which was, a very well-deserved honor, to say the least.
I think one of the most interesting conversations we had this year was with Paul Kayar, who's the head of U.S. Sailing's Olympic program. Paul talked about the need for money, which is need for opportunity, and certainly the direction he wants to take. He examined a little bit of the U.S. sailing model, and he talks a little bit briefly about how we've sort of gotten out of our top spot in the world. And he talked a little bit about how he wants to bring that back and what sailing means to him. And for a 7-time Olympian, and the sailing resume speaks for itself. But Paul talked about some interesting aspects of what's hopefully is going to happen in the next few years under his tutelage. World Championships, 2 Olympics, and then 7 times in the America's Cup. The resume speaks for itself. What I want to ask you, you speak 3 languages. You've had a lot of time in the corporate world. Your movement, and I kind of want to ask you a couple questions about the Olympic process. As you get in that middle 60 range, is moving into the business of Olympics, because of your background in sailing and all of your business background, is that an easier transition than maybe it would have been for somebody without the business background?
Yeah, I mean, that's a fair supposition. I just think that taking on this job as the executive director of U.S. Olympic Sailing at my age, I was 62 last year when I took the job. I'm emotionally committed to doing it through the LA Olympics in 28, at which point I'll be 69. I think I'm still not too old, but yet I have a lot of experience, which, a younger person doesn't have. So hopefully I'm in a unique position at this stage of my career to contribute to the Olympic movement. And, I was part of the 84 team as an alternate. And, I remember the days when we were recruited to sail foreigners' boats. And now, you have the America's Cup boats being skippered by Australians or Kiwis, So not only have we kind of lost our way in the Olympic realm, but commensurately, we've lost our way in our presence in the international yachting scene. So I see this job for me is trying to really return and turn around a movement within the United States to get to the top echelons of our sport.
Briefly, why have we lost our way? What road did we take, and what's the mission for you? What do you see as a sort of a mission statement to get us back to sort of equal to, on par with maybe some of the guys down under?
Well, I'll start with the mission. The mission is clear. What we want to attain is Olympic dominance, podium finishes in all the Olympic classes, year in and year out. We're not measured by 1 year or one Olympic Games. We need sustainable performance, because if you have sustained performance, then what that means is you've developed a machine a pipeline of talent, a machine to train that talent, to support that talent, because year in and year out, you're on the podium, right? Let's look at Great Britain. That's where they're at. So that's the mission, is to build that machine and year in and year out, compete for the podium in the Olympic class sailboats. We lost our way because the Brits realized that they need to build that machine 25 years ago. And we in the United States were the beneficiaries of a lot of great talent. And when the game wasn't quite so professional, when it was what I call bring your own, we had no coaches. We just all showed up, and, you'd go to the Star Trials, there'd be 40 boats, and it was, Bill Buchan and Vince Brune and Mark Reynolds and Paul Kayard and Ed Adams. I mean, pretty damn good sailors. And we were all recruited all over the world to sail, but we just had that talent. And when the rest of the world was also sort of playing in this unorganized, not so much coached realm, United States of America dominated. But when the rest of the world got some funding and said, hey, let's get organized about this, and let's build a farm team, and let's build a system, and we'll have, 200 coaches working on this and that. We didn't do that because we were resting on our laurels, and we got past. So now we're in the catch-up game. And in all sports, the world has gotten more professional. So it's not really shocking. There's actually nothing magical about what we're trying to do. It's all kind of out there and known stuff, but we just need to do it. We actually have to bring the pieces together, and that's what I'm doing.
Well, a little involved in the U.S. Olympic pipeline for ski racing, and have been for a lot of years. Money is always the contingent that you have to have. If you don't have it, it's training, it's travel, it's all those things that go with it. Would it be helpful? I know this is an obvious question, but would it be helpful for the government to get involved in some of that funding? And then what appropriate number do you think might work to help sailing and skiing, and sports that we don't typically see except every 4 years on ABC or NBC?
So skiing got their act together about 20 years ago. They have a $30 million a year budget. They have a big following of private supporters because they have a World Cup event every year in the country, usually in Beaver Creek. They get, TV revenue. So they have a commercial side that works pretty good. So they're able to, and I studied a lot of ski and snowboard. Tiger Shaw, who was the CEO of Ski and Snowboard, was on a research project that I did with McKinsey before I took the job.
Okay.
So we've gone to school on ski and snowboard. And again, they started 20 years ago getting their machine going. So in some ways, we're following that machine. Our budget this year is $6 million. Historically, it's been about $4 million. I was able to raise enough money to make it $6 million. My goal is to raise it $1 million every year through 2026, at which point we'll be running on $10 million a year. I think on $10 million a year, we can do a good job. Great Britain spends a little bit more, like $15 million a year. So obviously when we were on 4, they were almost spending 4 times what we're spending. When we get up to 10, I think we can beat and compete with Great Britain. Would it be helpful for the US government to be involved? Well, probably, of course, it would be. But I think I don't know that that's going to happen. And in a subtle way, you can say that the US government is helpful because they do allow us to raise money through 501c3, tax, not-for-profit organizations. So people who do donate to us get a tax write-off. So you could consider that governmental support. Nothing like the British system. The British government decided that their lottery system would give £500 million a year to UK sport. So UK sport is the equivalent of the US Olympic Committee. And so that £500 million gets doled out across, swimming and track and field and sailing and rowing and, all the Olympic sports. But that's what the British government decided to do. I'm not waiting around for the US government to do that. But we have a blessing in the United States of America. We have a concept called an endowment. And it's a very well understood concept in America. These universities like Yale and Harvard and Stanford have $30 billion endowments. So how is it possible that the US Olympic Committee doesn't have a $200 million or a $1 billion endowment? But they don't. They haven't done that. So what part of my sustainability program so that I can walk away from this thing in 2029 is I'm building $100 million endowment for the U.S. Sailing Club. And Ding Schoonmaker, whom I'm sure you know, a great star sailor, I was able to meet with. He passed, unfortunately, and he loved Project Pinnacle, which is this project that what we're doing. And he committed in his estate $7.5 million to the endowment. And the last 2.5 is a match. So trying to create the first $10 million brick, let's say, of the 100 million.
Right.
And so we're really fortunate with that. But that's the professional. You can't just go around begging for money forever, because people say, well, when is this going to end? So I'm trying to build a better, smarter, an actual revenue model. Like, what's the revenue plan here? Revenue plan is to grow commercial sponsorship from the 1.25 million we have now to 3 million. It's to bring in if we have $100 million in endowment, we should be able to count on 4 million a year of, kickoff from the endowment, right? Without invading the principal. And so now we have 7 of the 10, and, maybe we still ask and get donors, but more for like 2 or 3 million, not the full 6 million, the way we are now. So these are the kind of big picture items, Greg, that I'm trying to resolve. These are the glaring things that to me are missing and why we got passed.
I think the best interview that we had a chance to conduct all year was with Terry Hutchinson. Terry was forthright, honest. There's an interesting journalistic aspect to the first part of the interview. We talked to Matt Cassidy, as you saw earlier in the show, a little bit about the accident in AC down in New Zealand. I asked the question of Terry, because Terry was the one that got trapped underneath when the boat had turned over. Old journalists ask questions, hopefully that make some sense and that you can get answers to. At the same time, we also learned that if somebody doesn't want to answer a question, no is a perfectly good answer. I asked the question, you'll see Terry's response, and I hope there was some respect for the kinds of interviews that should be conducted the way we do it, because you have to respect somebody's privacy, and I think that's important. And hopefully it came to a better point, because we'll bring you that in a second.
I just briefly we had Matt Cassidy on last week, and he was on a support boat. You guys had a pretty catastrophic accident in 2020 in New Zealand. 21. Okay. Can you maybe walk through that? What's something like that's like? Because I don't think that happens very often.
I'm going to leave it in the past.
Okay, that's fine.
It's over with, and like I said, all these experiences you have to take forward and improve upon, and I'm confident that we've lived it.
Okay,
Lessons have been learned, but at a certain point,
no, that's fine.
Need to move forward from it too.
I think Terry was short and sweet and to the point, and it led me to my last question, which to me was the most extraordinary answer for the entire season. And it's one of those things in a long form interview, you've got to make somebody comfortable when you're able to talk to them. And a lot of times we're in the worlds of public relations, and it's hard in a 30-minute or a 45-minute interview to settle somebody down so that they can trust what you say. I asked the most difficult question of all, and Terry came away with the single best answer for me as an interviewer. It was honest, it was straight ahead, and I think it was exactly correct. And it's the kind of interview and the kind of information that we want to be able to bring to the show, and the kind of interviews that matter, so that you can learn something from people that are at the highest part of the sport, but at the same time, maybe that same premise relates to, we don't want to do public relations. We want to do honest to goodness interviews and learn something. So hopefully we're able to do that. So this is the last part of that show, and we'll see what you think.
And the absolute last question.
Yeah.
America's Cup victory would mean to you what?
Ooh. Relief.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, that's I don't really allow myself to think about it, because it's an incredibly hard problem to solve. And so in 2007, when we were in the thick of the match and we were tied with Alinghi 2-2, and in race 5 we were around the top mark in the lead, and ended up with 3 spinnakers in the air off the boat as Alinghi sailed past us. You recognize this. Not at the time, when you get a little bit further away from the regatta, you recognize the importance and the significance of where you are in the curve of the America's Cup. And right now, I think New York Yacht Club, American Magic, I think we're actually in a very strong spot. I mean, we've got some great sailing talent. We've got some great designers. Our limitations are we took a year off as we got ourselves reorganized and restructured. So, and we're up against some formidable competitors. But I don't think about winning the regatta. I think about making sure that our team is in a spot to succeed. And, in October this year, when we get cranked up for the next 24 months, to make sure everybody's head down and focused on the task at hand, because, the opportunity is very real. It's a brutal game, as we learned in AC 36, and yet the margins between success and failure are small. And yet when you succeed, it always looks much bigger than what it is.
That was the single best answer of any interview we've done in the 90 shows we've attempted, and that's why I'm bringing it to you last. There's been nothing more enjoyable than bringing you inside Great Lakes Sailing. We have some opportunities over the next couple of months to kind of figure out where we want to take the show and what we want to do. We should point out that this is a labor of love. There's no commercials involved, or we go commercial, then it becomes a job, and we want to be able to get more places and do more things. We also want to distribute it in a way that more people get a chance to see it, because we think there's good information here. We'll keep plugging. We'll keep covering the events, and hopefully we learn something. Maybe we find some niches that we haven't found in the past, and just kind of enjoy what we're doing. So we're going to take a couple of months off until probably the middle of February. We're going to get a chance at the end of January to head down to Pensacola and be a part of the America's Cup family for about 4 days and hang around the compound and just kind of interview some of the folks we've had a chance to talk to already as they get ready for the 2024 race in the Mediterranean. And we hope you'll be back with us next summer. We're going to get a kind of a better format, a different format. If you got any suggestions, you can certainly send them our way. But we appreciate those who've watched, and we hope that you appreciate all that goes on. I also want to thank all the guys at Crescent Sail Yacht Club, where I belong. They've been really cool about giving us opportunities and just, helping us get to where we go, because everything I said has been on the dime. So for all those in the back and everybody who's been a part of the show and everybody that's watched, we thank you. Have a great winter. And the unique part of this week and the last show is I've been skied and sailed in the same week. That doesn't happen very often. So the best of holidays to all of you, and thank you for watching.